Regardless of the sport, athletes need to be strong and build muscle to be successful. But how much muscle should athletes actually build? I'm gonna show you how to get jacked so that you can become elite, and we're gonna start right. Lean muscle mass benefits all athletes to a point. We're not talking about big hulking bodybuilder muscle mass. We're talking about that agile, sleek, lean type of body that's going to produce a massive amount of force and be elastic. So having lean muscle mass is going to be key to creating some sense of joint stability. And this is really important, especially when we're looking at new athletes. Okay, so if we get a new kid that comes in the door, they're younger, the first thing that we want to do is build a massive amount of muscle on them to help them be more stable. When they're more stable, they can apply more force. Now, one of the issues here is that we'll see inside of strength training is that a lot of research is done on newbie lifters, and everybody thinks we do 3 sets of 10, that's the rep scheme that's gonna help them get stronger to gain more lean muscle mass, because that's something that works for newbie lifters. So we've just gotta be aware when we're trying to gain a large amount of muscle mass, we can get a little bit more creative than just that 3 sets of 10. But with that being said, we still need to keep things simple. So doing simple rep schemes does work to a point, but the most important factor here is that we need to keep the movement simple, and we can sort of identify 3 to maybe 4 types of movement. So the first type of movement might be a press, okay? So you're gonna do some type of press here, right? Another type of movement might be a pull. We can do a row here. Ooh, get a nice little pump. Now, another type of movement might be a squat, okay? So I could squat like this. Ooh, or is that a pull? Technically, everything's really a press. If we're looking at how muscle functionality actually works, everything technically is a press. But now, another big question is this a pull or a hinge? So really it's gonna come back to doing a press, doing a pull, doing a hinge, doing a squat. Okay, so those are the main compound movements that we're gonna utilize to try and increase that muscle mass. Developing lean muscle mass can improve coordination. It can improve neural growth and overall stability. But what does the research say? Recent research does suggest that the more muscle mass someone has, the more force that muscle can produce. So take sports like football or wrestling or powerlifting or weightlifting. In powerlifting, I will say, was the specific sport that recent study was looking at when they were looking at larger amounts of muscle mass. And if you have larger amounts of muscle mass, in theory, based off of this research, you will be able to produce more power, or what we should be calling it is impulse. You will be able to apply more force in a designated period of time. So think about football. You could hold that block or get into that block a little bit quicker. You're gonna be able to apply more force in that short period of time. Your impulse expression is going to be greater. Now look at powerlifting and weightlifting. Think about hitting a snatch or pulling a deadlift, putting more force in that time period into the deadlift bar. You'll be able to be more successful with achieving those stronger reps. Or even standing up that gigantor squat. Science seems to say that bigger muscles are more beneficial, but how are they more beneficial? So when we're looking at larger muscles, okay, we gotta think about, one, how are we gonna train this? And if we look at something like Garage Strength Program Design, specifically inside of our app Peak Strength, we're gonna train hypertrophy, or the means to gain muscle mass, typically on day 5. And one thing that we'll do on day 5 is we'll use things like compound movements, then we'll use isolation movements. This is going to help us target problem areas. This is going to help us see where we can isolate specific muscles that might be lagging to then try and increase their strength to then break plateaus. So 1, we can have joint stability improve. 2, we can improve by isolating weak points and strengthening those specific muscles so that we can then break plateaus with compound movements. And then 3, if we're in the sports performance world, there is some sense of intimidation. There is some sense of looking at another athlete and be like, oh, that guy is really freaking jacked, or that chick is really freaking yoked. Think about this scenario. If we're a wrestler and we're in high school, let's say I'm a freshman in high school, and I look across the mat and I have to wrestle this other dude who might be a terrible wrestler, but his veins are bulging out of his biceps and his lats are freaking wings. I'm gonna get a little bit intimidated and potentially start to play some head games. So having lean muscle mass or having more lean muscle mass can help with that joint stability, can help with intimidation, and it can help us break through those plateaus. Let's look at an exercise like the pull-up, okay? So let's say I'm let's say I'm on the pull-up bar and I'm pretending that I can't do a pull-up. And I'm getting to here, I'm flailing all over the place. Oftentimes from here to here, that's not actually even gonna be lat strength. That's typically going to be a bicep issue. So what's the solution? So we can increase that bicep size and strength by doing something like a spider curl. So we strengthen our bicep so we can finish that pull-up. So one thing that we can look at is that when we actually strengthen our buys, our lats in turn will get stronger as well, at least in the regard to doing better pull-ups. But what about if we're trying to train muscles that are gonna help us sprint faster? Take me, for example. I don't have the strongest quads. I'm a posterior dominant athlete, but if I can do something like a sled push and increase mass on my quads, it's gonna help me later on in my programming. Now, because the bigger muscles will be able to apply more strength and more force, what ends up happening is we're gonna be on this artistic venture of balancing increasing muscular size, along with those athletic movements, along with those really, really high speed movements. When we're laying out our strength training app, Peak Strength, which you can download at peakstrength.app, we'll look at something like an athletic movement. Okay, so let's say we're doing something like a technical coordination exercise, like a power clean or a full snatch, something along these lines. Then the next thing that we'll do is we'll look at really, really high speed movements. Might be doing a plyometric movement or a plyometric exercise. And when we have larger muscles, if we're training that and balancing that accordingly with high speed movements and with those athletic movements, now we're gonna be able to produce more power. So if we're looking at hypertrophy based movements, we might do something like a sled push or a sled pull backwards or a leg extension or a leg press. And if we're balancing all of those things accordingly, we're going to lead to better performance. So what do we do with hypertrophy work as we go through our phases of periodization? So the last 6 to 8 weeks of programming, we tend to pull out that hypertrophy or at least decrease that volume to enable greater recovery. So the muscles are built, the athletes are jacked, and we've got to look at now those big time muscles are going to be used to develop a massive amount of force. Remember, at this point in our periodization, we're going to decrease the hypertrophy work. Now we're gonna focus on those high speed movements. We're gonna focus on creating a greater athlete so that we can lead to higher levels of impulse expression. We're gonna lead to greater amounts of force put out. If we can remove that hypertrophy to a point, now what ends up happening is that our athletes will be in a better position to peak when they're focusing on speed, when they're focusing on speed of recruitment, and then in turn, they can produce a massive amount of force in a short period of time. They're gonna achieve greater velocity. They're gonna have greater average velocity as well. So building a recovery hack into your programming and into your training is a really good way to deal with that increased lean muscle mass. This is exactly what we do inside of our strength training app, Peak Strength, where we have over 700 different exercises and we periodize specifically based off of what your season is, what your specific sport is, with over 40 different sports. Head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. You can download Peak Strength today. You'll get 5 free workouts, and then you can build out to lead into that big time peak. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.